Hi, Rani.
Hi, Rona.
Thank you for doing this reflection with me. And as we have agreed, we're going to reflect on how can adults start recovering from a history of pedagogical relations that socialized them into conformity.
Yeah, that's a very interesting and profound question. So, my suggestion is like, let's start from our personal perspective or experience, then we'll go on what we have seen here in this program, and finally, what we can expect in after we graduate.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yeah, so we can do that. For me, I mean, in Philippines, we followed the American educational system, and we've been socialized into conformity with that kind of system. It was hard for me at times because I tend to be very independent in my thinking, and that's got to do with my parents encouraging that independent thinking and not always believing what authorities or experts say. We're encouraged to challenge that, but it can be quite alienating to do that. And then also coming from a very Catholic country, that education as well comes from, church-based organizations where our worldview is very much shaped by that Catholic Christian upbringing. So that's how we're socialized into conformity.
Yeah, in my case, I would say we are the result also of banking education. So coming from a public high school, I remember having most of the teachers silence me because our voices were not heard. I wouldn't say that it was like their fault fully. I would say that it is a whole system that has been planned to have, for example, for students in the classes, and that of course made it possible to have like um an education that was less focused into conformity. So it was also for the teachers a difficult job. But yeah, that's what happened during high school. And then when I went to the university, it was a little bit different because I come from a left-wing university, highly focused on social sciences. And that's when I started recovering my voice. But I would also like to talk a little bit about informal education, non-formal education, because it was by belonging to a nonprofit and also to a reading club where I understood that my voice was important and that I should be an advocate for the ones that cannot do that.
And I agree with you when it comes to informal education. And I think that's where the recovery for me started. I suppose being exposed to communities I'm not normally exposed to is part of the learning experience as well. I mean, I came from middle class privileged background, and just being exposed to people of different background and even low social economic status opens up my eyes. I've worked for example, as professional volunteer presenter for migrant advocacy and understanding what they go through. But also almost throughout my life, I've done a lot of volunteering and pro bono, for example, with Women's Diversity Network for advocating for Black women or women of color in the USA, and then Inclusive Development International that fights for land and climate justice. So even though I was doing that in an advisory capacity or consulting capacity, it's just learning from that experience and getting the exposure of what communities go through that I'm normally not exposed to, that helps me my journey in that recovering from being socialized into conformity, just recognizing those different realities.
So yeah, the reality, for example, in Colombia and in Latin America is social movements are very active. So being active has been like really into, the different, let's say processes. So for example, in my case, I remember once a teacher taking us to a 1st of May, to protest and, giving us the voice to see the reality that was going on. And I was a teenager. So, and then that stick into my mind. And then when I went to the university, it was also about going to marches. So I would say like that installed like this need to work with others. So I would say, for example, when I was in the high school, I didn't feel connected. I was silent. But then when I became a teacher, I made sure that students were here, and that was like one of the things that I always keep in mind.
And from what we learned about curriculum development for social change, what were the elements of that you saw in teaching in classroom that maybe you're starting to apply, or you in reflection you're starting to see?
Yeah, basically, it's interesting that I came here to reflect about Latin American pedagogies, and seeing Friday in the classes, it calls my attention greatly because it's going deeper into what he used to say. So, for example, this idea that he has about treating students as equal is highly positive and important, because he's understanding that although you sometimes can have more preparation, because for example in my case coming from the academia, I can have a little bit more of knowledge. I would say that the students also have a lot of information that is valuable. So, for example, what we have seen in the classes, having students in the taking into account with their biographies, the stories that they have to tell, and also their feelings are important factors that need to be considered these days.
Yeah. And I can agree with you. I can relate with you on that, on the respect, and also with that recognizing that we are all co-contributors, and also they are intellectuals in their own right. So I've experienced that, for example, in getting involved with a think tank. It's almost like a community of learning. It's fascinating because even though there is one facilitator guiding us through the process, there was no really one dominant thinker in the group. Like we all got to share. It's a very diverse group of people. It was very enriching. I think that's what we refer to in class as a cultural circle. So these were a group of residents coming together, some of them experts, some of them from the academia, some grassroots civic leaders, and looking into the issues about the use of open space and how that impacts well-being. And with that, there were a lot of issues and challenges that we talked about. But just coming together as a group, that was very energizing. And I think that's one way of getting past that socialization into conformity, is really listening to diverse voices from a space of respect, from a space of recognition that we are co-contributors and intellectuals, but also creating that safe space to contribute.
Yeah, something that calls or that I really like about these masters is like the possibilities that we have to express ourselves in the classes with all the knowledge that we have. So it's because it's very easy to see this in theory, but what happens, for example, in the curriculum development class, where everybody has the same opportunity to speak, and as you mentioned before, you feel safe to mention whatever you want to say. That's important, but also I am always thinking about self-agency.
Yeah.
So as educators, it's important, like not only to be in class, but also to know that we have some responsibilities. So what we mentioned a little bit ago is about being intellectually prepared, which means like you're going to be at a higher level, and you need to stick to that, because you're going to give the best out of you to the students, for example.
And I think part of that too is being present to what's happening around us, being present to the community, being present to the issues that's going on, and not just in the local community, but also globally. So much is happening right now with the climate crisis, the cost of a living crisis from the inflation and energy crisis, and so on. And all these conflating issues are actually interrelated, and that has an impact locally. And being intellectually prepared to tackle these issues with a strong foundation and with all those competencies that we talk about when it comes to curriculum development for social change, being in a position to then self-advocate, but also create the ability for others, or not, maybe that's the wrong wording, but facilitating rather, in participation with others on how do you identify the issues that matter, and then co-creating solutions to that.
Yeah, I would add something small there, and is what we mentioned one day in the class, and is that education is not neutral.
Yes.
So we have to take a stand, and for example, in this case that you are mentioning, is understanding that if we are advocating, for a more fair society, then we have to talk about these issues that are affecting many people and are creating bigger inequalities. So how can we work together as communities to improve Mhm,
And I think that's my biggest takeaway is that notion of participation, collaboration, and community.
mhm.
What about you? Biggest takeaway?
Yeah, I would say working together for big causes that impact the most on privilege. That would be my takeaway.
Okay. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
honey.
you. Have a good one.